Exciting Neo Geo Max 330メガの劇的体験 Neo Geo System SNK.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric and a continuing series, Neo Nostalgia, where I take a look at my favorite Neo Geo AES or MVS games of all time. And today we're taking a look at the King of Fighters 2002. And yes, I could have put King of Fighters 98 on this list because that game is spectacular, but this is the first Neo Geo game I ever owned, and I bought it in about 2005. Before we get too far involved, though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and hit the notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we have a Patreon link down below as well. But I've loved King of Fighters 2002 since I first played it in arcades in like 2002, and when I decided to get into Neo Geo collecting, it was the first game I ever purchased. And interestingly enough, I had the option to buy the US or the Japanese copy. I bought the Japanese one because it looked cooler for the same price as the US one, and the price difference is huge now. But as you saw there is an absolute massive amount of characters you can pick in KOF 2002 because it is a dream match. Both 98 and 2002 don't really have any story as far as the game's concerned, but they just have every single character you could possibly ever want to play as, and that is always so much fun for me because honestly, the story in fighting games is like the story in adult films. It's there because it has to be, but honestly no one is consuming the entertainment for that particular purpose. But what is on offer in KOF 2002 is some of the best action in the series in my opinion. It has every character you would want to use and tons that you would definitely not want to use because it's really hard to pick a main 3 characters in this game because there are so many combinations you could make. But I always go with Mai just because she's the one I played with first and that just makes sense to me. But this game looks spectacular, it plays spectacular, and it's got a great soundtrack to boot, and I always love the cover art for it as well, and it is still one of the games for the Neo Geo AES, at least in the Japanese version, that it'd be considered relatively affordable. It's not cheap, but compared to some of the other games on the system, it definitely is cheap, if you know what I mean. But I just love the visual style of this game, and I guess by 2002 this was aging a little bit, but it still looks great to me. And this was made by Eolith, a South Korean developer. This is after SNK went bankrupt and they became SNK Playmore. And I will say their first attempt at the KOF franchise 2001 is a pretty bad game. It's not as bad as I think people make it out to be, but it is certainly the last game in the KOF franchise that I would play on Neo Geo. And I have a full set from 94 to 2003, so I have the option to play whatever it is I want. And I've always loved the King of Fighters, in 2002 especially, is just how much the stages change between each match. There's different times of day and different background art will come in, and these character portraits are relatively decent. They might not be the best, but they're a hell of a lot better than 2001. But there's so many weird and interesting things with this game. I mean, we're in this Dutch field here, there's a giant wooden clog, and there's 3 sheep that say KOF with a baby sheep holding up a sign that says O2. The game's got a lot of personality. It may not all make sense, but I do love all of it. And of course, because this is a King of Fighters game, it's the exact same fighting engine that you know and love, and everything is perfectly responsive and plays extremely well. There's tons of characters to choose from, so you can decide who works for you and experiment around. I'm just showing off some different characters here so you can take a look at who exists, even though that's usually Mai is my main, and that's usually who I play the entire game through with. But there's so many different King of Fighters games to choose, it was hard to narrow it down to just one for this series, and I definitely just wanted to include one, and that is just because the nostalgia factor. I've owned this game for almost probably 15 years now at this point in time. It was my first Neo Geo game, and it holds that special place in my heart for owning it. There's so many different King of Fighters games on the platform. You can pick and choose which one you like the best. 2003 is a unique one and it's interesting, but to me I just keep coming back to 2002 and checking it out. And I do love the character and team selection screen. You can decide who you want to face against next and which order you want to put your characters in. That's pretty much classic KOF, but it is nice to be able to play around with that. But the soundtrack is awesome as well, so go ahead and listen for like 35 to 45 seconds. I'll come back and tell you more why I think 2002 is the best King of Fighters on the Neo Geo for nostalgia reasons alone. But enjoy. It's always been an interesting soundtrack because it sounds great, but it's slightly muffled, and it's kind of what all of the King of Fighters music sounded like. It was just kind of the way that they were able to kind of like emulate a stereo sound in and of itself. But again, this is just such a fun game, and this is the game that got me into Neo Geo collecting. I can't believe that at one point in time I only had one cart, and now where I have a huge amount of them sitting on my shelves. And this was kind of the game that really got me into the King of Fighters franchise, because I had seen them in arcades. I had played 98, but when 2002 came out, I was in high school, my local arcade had it, and I played the ever-loving hell out of it. And I know that Street Fighter is huge in the fighting game community and probably the more liked franchise, but this is the game that I've always played, and it's the game that's made me always like SNK fighting games over Street Fighter. And you can leave me a comment down below and tell me what you think about that. I'm sure it's going to be split pretty much 50-50, people that like King of Fighters more than Street Fighter, and the opposite. But again, just moving through back to this Dutch stage with the windmill in the background, I love the attention to detail in the artwork. That windmill casts a shadow over the actual structure, and it just looks so nice and unique. And I love this, person back there taking photographs while another person waters the garden and a rainbow shows up. Those are all such small details that don't add anything to the scene as far as the game is concerned, but you can just tell somebody really loved doing this. And as you move into sunset and you have those crows picking the field there, it is just so interesting. But this game doesn't just exist in a vacuum. There's also King of Fighters 2002 as a remake. It was originally on PlayStation 2, and I'm playing this on the Taito Type X right now, and it is another alternate version of this game. It is wholly different, but there's two ways to play 2002, and they're totally different experiences. I still prefer the original Neo Geo version, but that remake on PlayStation 2 that went to the Type X is excellent as well. And that's just the thing about the King of Fighters. The mechanics have always felt great to me. That 4-button setup, how everything works and executes, those 4 buttons being in that row, that's what a fighting game to me feels like. And when I go over to Street Fighter and we have something like a 6-button setup, it can get a little bit more muddy feeling in my hand, and I know that's just because I haven't spent the time with it. But this is the type of game that I will play, once every couple months, probably for the rest of my life until I stop gaming or I'm just end up dead, because probably I'll game until that moment happens. That's how important this game is to me, and that's why when I was thinking about what King of Fighters game to talk about on this series, I knew it had to be 2002, even if technically it's probably not the best game in the entire run. It just has that special factor to me that clicks and feels good. And I remember playing this on a CRT television with a composite cable when I first got my Neo Geo and the cartridge. Now I can play it on MiSTer FPGA with this beautiful scaling, but there's so many different ways to play this game. Is it worth buying an AES copy? I would say it is. It's not that expensive if you want to get into collecting. The King of Fighters games in Japanese versions outside of 2003 are still relatively cheap, so you could pick up a few and play them on the original AES cartridge, or if you want to collect for MVS, they're very cheap as far as that format is concerned. And I do always like that you get at the end of the game this versus battle where you just have to defeat one character, and for some reason in 2002 it's one of the easiest fights in my opinion. It really isn't difficult compared to some of the other matches you faced before it, and of course being an SNK game, the final boss is going to be hard as absolute nails, but was able to take her down there with my first character, and a character that I don't usually play as that much because I was trying to mix it up for this capture. But again, even things like this, those TVs floating in the air, have like a 3D dimensionality to them, even though they are completely made out of 2D assets. And if you don't notice there on the right, there's a friend that we're going to be seeing ever so shortly. But I love that this cameraman follows the fight around, panning left and right. It is just a blast to look at. And you see the characters on the other team that you're going to be fighting shortly if you're victorious, and they're just hanging out in the background doing different things with different animations. It's a small touch, but it is absolutely spectacular. And I already here always been the second person I play as after my, and then the third character I kind of just pick at random just to see what I'm feeling like. But each character has their own unique animations, they have their own unique personalities, and of course a lot of these sprites have been reused from past games, but you do get ever so slight of a cutscene with a tiny bit of story. Even though this is a dream match and there really isn't any quote-unquote story to be had, it still gives you just a little bit of flavor imagery to get you to that boss fight. And that boss fight is going to be against Rugal, and that is one of the cheapest fights in my opinion in the entire King of Fighters franchise, and it is a franchise known for extremely cheap final boss battles. SNK just wanted a few more quarters before they showed you the credits, and in this instance, they wanted a lot more credits before you saw the ending as well. He just has the ability to predict every single movement and take half to 2/3 of your life bar off with a single attack. Almost all of his attacks seem unblockable, and it's just a real pain in the butt, but that is what King of Fighters is all about. It's really easy to get to the boss, and it's extremely difficult to actually beat him. But leave me a comment down below. If you had to categorize one King of Fighters game on the Neo Geo as the quote-unquote best, which one would you pick? I'm curious to hear, because they're all great except for 2001. That's not perfect. Try that. I'll be back next Tuesday with more Neo Geo, but I will see you guys next time. We lost. Bye-bye.